Hello, JP here. Today we have an awesome interview with Dennis Lowe, a special effects technician and member of the model shop unit on the movie Alien. Now, Dennis went on to work on many film projects over the following years and later became an effects supervisor. He has also made many experimental and documentary films, which is what first drew me to his work on Alien. Dennis has made a collection of fantastic documentary films called Alien Makers that document the making of Alien from collecting stories from crew members on the original production. Now, I have to say, these are probably my favourite type of making of type films, because you get such unfiltered stories from production members that were there on the studio floor, and some of the stories are hilarious. It also provides a unique window into the filmmaking industry at that time here in the UK, which is a story not often told. So a few weeks ago I sat down with Dennis to talk about his time working on Alien, and we joined the interview just after Dennis explained his experience at Falmouth Art School to his first break into the film industry. Do you think your experience at art school helped you transition into the film industry?
Well, yes. I mean, I was really lucky, I think, as well. I think there's a certain amount of luck as well, And in some respects, I think in a certain small percentage, you can create your own luck, by being interested in certain ideas and ways of thinking. And I was just lucky to get into the right crew on the film side. I mean, after Falmouth, I went to a film school in Beaconsfield. That's why I'm around that area at the moment. As soon as the Beaconsfield the film experience finished in Beaconsfield, it was the recession, and I became a scenic artist for a couple of years until the recession finished, and then because there was no work in the film industry anyway. But once the film industry started to ramp up into speed again, I was lucky to get involved with Brian Johnson and Nick Holder. They worked as a team. There were two supervisors. And Brian Johnson started off on Space 1999, supervising Space 1999 with Nick Holder. And so that crew, there must have been about 8 on the crew there. We were there, it was called special effects technicians or assistants or whatever you like to call it. I was really lucky, and we just kind of like hit the ground running, really. First couple of films was Pink Panther, Revenge of the Pink Panther, but the art school experience taught me how to use lathes, the engineering sides. I mean, we could use drills and grinders and all this kind of stuff. Perfect for special effects, because you're in the workshop most of the time making stuff. And of course, the nice thing about that crew was that Nick Holder, especially Nick Holder, really, because he gave you a certain amount of freedom. If he thought that you had a few ideas to contribute to the movie, instead of just being a runner and making tea and stuff like this, he gave you the freedom to produce that idea, but he also had something on the back plate in case it failed, because of course you can never fail in a film. You're allowed one mishap, and then you have to think about your career after that. And so it was I was really fortunate to get in with the right crowd, and just on that kind of score, one of the big experiments I did at Falmouth was the thing you know about, which was the aluminium paint on white spirit. And just luckily, after that experiment, which is just solely an experiment to see what would happen, when the Alien film came up, and the idea of producing these transparencies with for the alien planet, that came into my head. That experiment that I did in 1968, so 10 years before, I'd sussed that out, obviously, and realized that maybe that could be a possibility on Alien. And of course, he gave us the chance. Nick gave me the chance to hire a Hasselblad, which you could do in those days, 2¼ squared single lens reflex camera, and And we spent about a couple of weeks. Oh, that's my phone going. I have to let it ring. We spent about a week experimenting. But it was that kind of freedom as well, which was very similar to a freedom that we had in art school, that I love so much, about the film industry, because I love to be that kind of free spirit, knowing full well at the end of the day you have to come up with the goods. And luckily, we won transparency, which was just perfect, fitted the role of the alien planet, as you know, and I think that's actually what got me a credit on the film. I didn't ask him if it did, but I'm assuming it did because I did a lot of background painting as well, stars and galaxies and stuff like that. And it was Brian Johnson and Nick Holder's kind of experience on Space 1999 that they came up with a kind of a system whereby basically it was a gridded ground glass that you could see with squares and a piece of paper with the same grids on, and you tracked where the spaceship was, and then you were determined obviously not to overlay that with the stars. And so that you were very, it was a kind of crude system whereby, but it worked for TV, and so when it came to Alien, because of Ridley's very kind of obviously a very pedantic kind of person, and Ridley was kind of quite famous then, because I think he'd done at least just under 1,000 commercials, with his brother Tony. And so we knew he wanted something a bit more, and so we kind of pulled, tried to pull as much as we could, minus obviously the motion control. So yes, it was done on a grid system where the cameraman plotted the shot where the track of the spaceship was, and then so obviously when we painted in the stars and the galaxies, we knew exactly where not to allow that exposure, as it were, and of course the film was rewound back in the camera quite a few times, because then we obviously did the stars and the sun separately and the planets. And of course the beautiful trick, which I didn't realize how it was done at first when I went on Alien. Well, I did actually do a couple of weeks on Space 1999 at the end of that series, about a couple of weeks really, was the planets, when it's a beautiful system, when they, at that time you could buy a copy of NASA's transparencies of the moonshot. So the astronauts that took these photographs of Earth with an Hasselblad, by the way, a converted Hasselblad in space, you were allowed to buy copies of these trannies. So you got these beautiful 2 1/4 square copies of the Earth, close-ups and wide shots of the Earth with a sphere. And what they did was to project that onto a white curve, part of a sphere. So it looked, like the Earth. And of course, the beautiful trick about that was if the projector was on a moving stand, so it panned, it looked as if the Earth was rotating, when in fact the transparency was only the one that was rotating. The actual Earth itself was static. Well, the white dome was static. And to me, that was like an amazing revelation, because that was a beautiful way, a very kind of different viewpoint of how you would look at an effect,
So we recently conducted our own small-scale recreation of the Alien derelict sequence. So I'm assuming, if you could talk us through the original, I'm assuming that once Ridley Scott signed off on the design from Giga, it was then given to someone like Nick Holder to build an armature. Is that how it went?
No, what it was slightly different from the Nostromo, of which there were no plans, by the way, at the start. Giga already kind of visualized the derelict, and he gave that job to Peter Voysey, the sculptor on the production there. But the actual guy that did the basis of it, the actual structure itself, was polystyrene blocks. And the polystyrene block to start with was done originally by a guy called Dick Budden. I think I interviewed him on one of the early ones. And he made the actual, basically the template, really, which then Peter Voisey worked on top of. And he did that with plasticine. Amazing. I mean, we all thought he was a bit crazy at first, because all of a sudden in the workshop at Bray Studios arrived this guy who we'd never seen before, who was a sculptor at on the production way back in Shepperton Studios, and while the preparation were still being kind of made. And Peter Voisey, a very quiet person, never said much, had a pipe, smoked a pipe, and looked into the sky every now and again. Fantastic kind of professor-looking chap. And he arrived with this plasticine, tons of plasticine, and started to cover the polystyrene section of the derelict with a very thin layer, and covered the whole lot in plasticine. And on top of that plasticine, then he did the detail. And of course, it was really easy because it was plasticine to plasticine, really. He just rolled out the lengths and the fine bars and everything in the derelict, and then just kind of press them in. And he spent most of his time then doing that. He never said much, really. And at that particular time, I was doing preparation work in the studios, the Bray Studios, ready for the shoot. Of the Nostromo and the landing sequence and all this kind of stuff. So I kept on popping into the workshop to see every now and again Peter Voisey, how far he'd got, and he'd do something like about a foot of detail a day, and it was just incredible to see. You go there at lunchtime, come back at the end of the day, and you'd see this section. And he was perfect for the job, because he didn't spend much time chatting with others. He concentrated totally on that derelict, and he did tend to keep himself to himself, because I think he felt that, coming in from Shepperton into Bray, and of course the kind of model making crowd were already a gang, as it were, really. And sometimes it's difficult to kind of make entrances into that kind of gang, And he was a slightly different generation as well. I think probably one generation older than us. So there was a little bit of that separation. I had a feeling that was going on, But he was really quite at ease with himself there. You could tell that, because he was just produced everything he did. It was just right.
His work was amazing. I mean, as you documented on your website and videos, he was an incredible artist, and it seemed to me that he had a really good eye that matched Giger's vision. Did Giger and him get on quite well?
I think Giger loved him secretly. And Giger used to come with Mia Bonsonigo, his partner at the time,
who looks a lot like Scarlett Johansson.
Yes. And we were, of course, Mia was always. Both of them were just dressed in black leather, and you can imagine Mia in black leather. She was absolutely drop dead gorgeous, and the whole of the workshop just stopped. And of course, we're all kind of like 20-year-olds, and we're all kind of like jaws dropping open, tongues hanging out, and she knew it, of course, and it was fantastic. They didn't actually spend much time there, because everything was working, and there was no reason for them to be there all that time. They trusted Peter enough to kind of just go there 5 minutes, off again.
So that derelict bigature, let's call it, how big was it? In some photos, it looks around 15 to 20 feet. Is that right?
Easily. They had to put quite a few stage props there. These stage levels, you could put on. They had about 4 of those on there. And it took quite a big area of the workshop as well, actually. And most of the people were working around the edge of the workshop anyway, on the benches. But Peter's derelict was right there in the middle. So I'd say probably the size of my workroom here. Yeah, I'd say about 12 by 15, yeah.
I mean, was part of the reason that these models were built at such a large scale to do with the fact that to hold scale without motion control frame rates, they would have to be physically bigger to hold the depth of field?
I don't think it was as detailed as that, or thought out as well as that. I think what happened was that, you know, the idea of the Nostromo was made because the workshop got fed up of waiting for plans from the art department, because they were obviously doing stuff, you know, at Shepperton, doing because Ridley was there, and, you know, he had to have his gear, you know. And so Ron Hone, who basically ran the kind of workshop in conjunction with Martin Bauer and others, he just got fed up and just said to the carpenter, "Come on, let's make something." And they started to build the Nostromo, you know. And it wasn't until they were halfway through it that the art department heard about this, came over to Bray, looked at what was going on, and then they wrote, you know, they drew the plans from what they'd seen. But it was full, in some respect, it was a kind of like a collaboration of sorts, and it was a great way because the idea was that the chemistry, I felt it was one of the few films I worked on where the chemistry in all the departments was just perfect. It didn't matter what went on, everybody kind of really got on well with each other, which is very rare. You know, there's usually a little bit of ego going on or something, you know, it's the kind of rung of the ladders, that kind of system. But this was the only time where everybody was okay with whatever happened because everything was going really well. Everything just seemed to work, you know, magically, you know. And so when I read the script of Alien to start with, I can remember saying to Guy Hudson, who was on the crew, "This is not going to look good on our CVs," because it read like a B movie, and most people on the crew that read it didn't say that exactly, but hinted at that. It just read a little bit. I mean, the chest burster thing was there and all that, but it just read like a B movie, like a 50s cheap movie, you know, that's the tail end of an A movie. You know, it felt a little bit cheap. Some of the ideas were great, but it just wasn't quite there. And when this is when the production started, by the way, and Dan O'Bannon, you know, Dan O'Bannon was going to direct it. And then we saw Dan O'Bannon. When I say we, I was working with Guy Hudson, making the instrument panels. This is before the Bray Studio. I moved to Bray Studios, so I was at Shepperton, and me and Guy made those instrument panels in the Nostromo, you know, in the cabin, and we were knocking these out. And every now and again, we'd see Dan O'Bannon walking past, like looking up in the sky, and you know, like he's like a lost boy, really. In some respects, he was like as if he wasn't sure what to do, and we thought this doesn't look good, you know, if he was to direct the film. And about a couple of weeks later, I mean, I must have been at Shepperton working on the instrument panels with Guy. Must have been there at least 6 weeks because we were doing all of them, you know. And within that 6 weeks, we found out that it'd been taken off as a co-producer, and then Ridley Scott coming in. That was good news. And then again, within a couple of weeks, we'd heard that Giga was doing the concepts. And as soon as that happened, we saw a second draft of the Alien, and I think this was a lot of input from obviously from Ridley. It started to look like an A movie, you know. It started to look like a proper, and then instantly, as soon as everybody read that draft, the magic happened. It was like it was worth killing yourself for it, you know. And so anyway, so when that kind of took on, we knew that we didn't have obviously motion control. The only people that had motion control was ILM. Obviously, they started the whole game really of that on the film side. And so I think Nick Calder, who kind of controlled most of the shoots on Space 1999 and obviously on Alien, he felt safer going back to the old Space 1999 techniques, because we just did not at that time have any of the technology. Nobody had started any of that kind of stuff before in England, and I think, and I felt, and I just have a feeling that Ridley, I didn't know this for certain, but I just had a feeling that Ridley felt that he could get away with it without motion control. Obviously, when as soon as Blade Runner started, he went over to the States and did it, properly.
Well, 40 odd years on, I think the effects work on Alien still stands up amazingly well, and I wonder if it was perhaps helped in a way by the limitations of the time and the budget that pushed more conventional techniques, like you said, as multiple in-camera exposures as perfected for something like Space 1999, that led to such pristine looking shots, because since you were effectively getting a lot of your final composite shots onto the original camera negative.
Yes. Well, in fact, the beauty of that technique, obviously, is it's the first generation. That's what comes out the camera, and so if in those days, if it was optically printed, you have to go through a second generation, obviously, which is not too bad, wasn't too bad, but you can see it, you can still see that and feel it. And the beauty of the first generation is that it's clean, it's absolutely clean if it's done properly, of course, and it's a bit like a way of lateral thinking. How can we get away with this shot? When he wants it to go over there, but how can we kind of tease it so we can get away with the same shot? And we learn sometimes it's possible to do something in the top left-hand corner if something embarrassing happens in the bottom right-hand corner of the frame. It's that kind of logic, and use that as part of the calculation of when you actually design the shot. One embarrassing episode comes to mind, and I love talking about embarrassing episodes because it shows people that nothing's perfect, even in a world with tons of money being thrown at it, And one of the events was this is when what used to happen is that when the Nostromo finally ended up its proper color, grey and not yellow. You know about the yellow grey thing, probably. And when he came to grey, Ridley, when he shot at Shepton Studio, he used to shoot. I think it must have started about 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning, finished about 5, 6 o'clock in the afternoon. Then came over to Bray to shoot the models, and then we'd shoot from like 7 o'clock till maybe 2 o'clock in the morning, And then he'd have a few hours sleep before he started at Shepperton again. But anyway, he was looking at the Nostromo, and of course, tons of smoke were put in, of course, full of smoke, and he just couldn't get the light kicking off the side of the Nostromo of the model. And I suggested that it was too clean. That's right. The side of the Nostromo, these massive engines, the fairly kind of square with rounded corners, as it were, wasn't it? It was just too clean. So I suggested spraying. At that time, you could get cans of spray glue that sprayed in a kind of like, and I think it was carpet glue actually. And I suggested we spray the side with this glue, right? And of course, Ridley suddenly got excited, and of course, I'm sure we're not allowed to swear on camera, but a lot of F words were effing great. Right. So without asking any permission from model makers, or because now I was on the crew, on the shooting side of the crew, as a special effects, of course. And so I got this spray out, and I sprayed one side of the engine, which actually I thought looked great because it was like dirtying down in 3D, because it's very small 3D particles, aren't they? They just stuck there onto these beautifully made model work. And Ridley couldn't get enough of it. He thought it was fantastic until word got out about, this is after the show, to the model department, which was still in, on call, as it were, in the workshop. And all hell let loose. And Brian heard about this, Brian Johnson, right? And he ripped me off. Amazing. He just couldn't stop shouting at me. And I just said that Ridley loved it, and it didn't matter whether Ridley had gone by this time, by the way. And the model makers gave me the look of death, and they spent all night cleaning up this side again, back to where it used to be. And for some reason, it died a death. And I got sent to Coventry for about a couple of weeks, and learned a lesson there that I should actually, if I suggest something to Ridley, the director, I should then okay again with, my boss.
I mean, what's evident in your fantastic documentary series, Alien Makers, is that, like you say, everyone seemed to pull together on that film and produce such fine work. What do you think the secret behind that was?
Well, I think that's due to Nick Alder, really, because he was there, he was on the floor pretty much every day, and he had that. He gave you the chance, like I said before. He did give you chances to prove yourself, but he also had, in the background, something just in case it didn't happen or didn't work, and it felt like a bit of a family atmosphere there. You fell out, but then again, it was okay the next day after a few jars in the bar at night, and it's that kind of quality, and again, it's that very rare occurrence when all the departments of the production kind of well together, and everything worked. Everything worked. Things didn't work, but it didn't matter because you knew you could kind of find a solution. It wasn't a problem when things didn't work, because that's part of the deal, isn't it, making films, and how you get over this stuff. And it had an incredible family atmosphere, and I must say as well, I mean, the director, Ridley Scott, he Newcastle bloke, you definitely knew where he was coming from. There was no airy-fairy about him. Great, a bit like James Cameron, who directed, did Alien 2. Knew what he wanted, because he was a cameraman, wasn't he, originally, James Cameron? So he knew what a 50mm lens was,
Yeah, well, he was from the Roger Corman school, so he knew bits of everything, didn't he?
Yeah.
So you were also part of Aliens as well in some capacity. What did you do on the sequel?
Well, we did all the motion control, because by that time I'd developed a company. I'd started a company called Archidon. I realised this is something that we definitely needed, obviously, in England, and there were no motion control companies in England at that time. And so I bumped into this guy, Nick Pollock, who did a lot of coding for different companies, and especially the audio side. The digital audio was starting to creep in at that time, at a very early stage, this is. And I was talking to him about motion control, and both of us, we decided to have a go at getting it going, getting the motion control gear going. I did the engineering, so I put the stepping motors and drivers and stuff like this, and he did the coding in machine code, by the way, which it's really difficult, not easy at all, because we had the Ohio superboard called a superboard. It was just a motherboard with a keyboard attached to it, and it had 8K of RAM.
Wow.
Expandable to 16K.
Wow.
So the program had to sit in 16K. Including the data that it would be, of 16 stepping motors that it would record onto audio tape. Would you believe? That was our recording medium. So anyway, we started this company called Archidon, and we did a film called Spaceworks, and for a company called Translux in the States. And then we invited Brian into the company because partly it was payback time for me, I felt, because Brian gave me my first job in the industry. And I felt that it would be great for him to be involved in the company and bring in the work, because, he was the supervisor. I wasn't. I was a tech guy, engineering kind of person. And Nick was the coding guy, and Brian was the perfect person to bring in the work. And of course, we got Never Ending Story after that, and Legend, and all this kind of stuff. And eventually Alien 2. And we did the motion control for all the model shots in Alien 2 then. Properly motion control, as it were, really. And so by that time we had VistaVision cameras. So we're shooting in kind of like equivalent to 8K, I guess, these days, and in-camera effects as well, because we were able to do, obviously, in-camera matting. So we had bipack magazines on top of cameras. I mean, a load of gear, you know, and heavy, of course, but it worked. And when Jim Cameron saw the results of the composites the next morning, which took about 3 or 4 days, by the way, because, you know, we had to shoot one scene and then take it out and then put a background in. You know, it took a day to do one pass, as it were, really. And when he saw that in first generation, without going through an optical printer, he really enjoyed doing it. And I loved the way Jim Cameron worked as well, because we were doing the title sequence, you know, where the Narcissus comes in at the beginning of the titles. And I said to him, I said, we need to know the size of the Narcissus at the beginning of the shot, the size of it at the end of the shot, how long is the shot, and roughly what the camera's doing. And what he did, he got a piece of polystyrene this big, put it on a film stand, and in those days there were Video 8 cameras, Sony Video 8 little video cameras, and he shot this sequence on with I still wish I had that scene of a piece of polystyrene, which was meant to be the Narcissus, right? And he tracked, you know, on handheld, this is, by the way, and he just did that on this piece of polystyrene, and it was perfect. It was exactly what we needed. It wasn't very beautiful to look at, but it meant a lot in terms of we got the right timing, we got the right size, we got everything, the camera move, and so all we had to do was shoot it. And so that's what I like about him, is that he wasn't fussy about, you know, pretending to get the right shots and all this kind of stuff. I love that lump of polystyrene now, and I really wish I'd kept that cassette, you know, because that would have been beautiful to have.
Well, I've heard stories. I've heard similar stories about him from, you know, different departments, and yes, he works people very, very hard, but he knows everyone's jobs. You know, if needs be, he could probably jump in and do your job for you, whatever you do, because he's kind of done it, and he has that amazing brain where he can, like you said, articulate kind of what he needs in an artist talking to an artist almost sometimes.
Yeah. And we didn't actually see him a lot, which was sometimes a good thing, because you know that you're doing something right, you know. And so we only saw him a couple of times, actually, because he was at Pinewood. I think they were shooting at Pinewood in this particular Alien 2, and we were in our own. We weren't at Bray anymore. We had our own industrial unit in Bourne End, just down the road here, which is near. I suppose it's near enough to Beaconsfield, Bourne End area. So it wasn't that far. It was about 20 minutes drive, really. So, but we didn't see much of him, and so a lot of it was done over the phone. Brian came across as well and told us what he felt we should do, and it was done really kind of quite simple, actually, quite easy. A lot of the stuff. Very rarely did we do any optical. I think we did about 4 or 5 optical shots, you know, on our printer at the time as well. So that went through a second generation, you know. But because it was a shot on VistaVision originally, it didn't look second generation, because we reduced it down to 35mm from VistaVision.
And by that time, your any film grain would have started so fine that by the time it would have gone through a generation loss, it would have still held up to 35. Yeah. Fascinating.
But we had most of our equipment was VistaVision, so we shot pretty much everything on VistaVision, and all our mats were VistaVision mats as well. So there were you know, kind of two 35mm side by side, really. And so we had a rostrum system, you know, we had our own film developing, we developed our own mats, partly because at that time, Rank, which were just down the road in Denham, Rank Labs, we had a lot of problems with it. We'd shoot a test strip, you know, on mats, we'd do a wedge, you know, going through the iris to get the right exposure of the mat, and send it off to Ranks, and then sometimes we'd get an exposure that looked right. we'd shoot the mat, send it off to ranks the next day, and it'd be totally different. And we thought we'd got to kind of get a handle on this. And eventually I bought a proper a film, a cine processor. You know, I'm talking about a big job here. This is about 16 feet long, right? And luckily, in Exchange and Mart, I kid you not, in those days, obviously, there was no internet. Exchange and Mart, there was a second-hand laboratory printer for sale. I think it was about a couple of grand. Not a lot of money even in those days. It was a couple of grand. And there must have been about 12 different types of tanks, you know. And we just went over there and bought it and got the guy to install it because we didn't know where all these things did. And he installed it for us. And then because we'd never processed anything before, we were able to ring up Kodak, who gave us these data sheets of how to mix the chemicals. And we bought chemicals in bags. You know, I took about 25 kilo bags here and mixed all our stuff. And I tell you, everything we did was spot on. Because if you know exactly how it works, you know, temperatures and stuff like that. Of course, the processor itself, most of the stuff was automatic. It went into a drying cabinet where it kind of like dried. You know, it was a proper gear. And once you were in total control of that system and that way of working, you can well, you know, you don't have to wait the next day to do your mats anymore. You can do them in 2 hours. You know what I mean? And in fact, we used to get calls from a lot of other special effects companies in London and Empire would to ask if we could develop their mats, but we had to say no because we weren't in the business of doing. You know, we did in some emergencies. We did some for people, and obviously didn't charge them. But we weren't in that business of doing it for other people. We had to do it our own. You know, keep the quality the same. But once we were in total control, every mat that we produced was spot on. And to tell you the truth, it wasn't difficult at all. It was dead easy. It wasn't, you know, you didn't have to be a professor to understand all this stuff, you know.
Wow. Well, like you said, being able to be in control of all of that and have it in-house so you know all the intricacies and quirks of certain equipment, I'm sure paid off for itself. I've seen some amazing pictures of you. One was, it looked like you with a naked Yoda. So,
oh yeah. Well, yeah, after I think John Hatt, when I interviewed John Hatt on Alien Makers, and he was talking about this business at the first time in his life. He worked on a film. He finished one film on Friday and started another major film on Monday, which was Star Wars, right? The Empire Strikes Back. And I was the same, basically. And we started, so it was that kind of, partly because I think Brian Johnson, did a contract with 20th Century Fox to do Alien. But part of that contract was that it would then do Empire Strikes Back because they were funding Empire as well, you say, as a 20th Century Fox production. And so that was just like impossible, like 2 major films that you knew were going to be major, you know, while you were working on them. They were going to be big ones, especially Star Wars, because you knew it was going to be successful after the first one. You know, it had to be, and especially when it's done by a different director. Because George Lucas, bless him, I don't think he was right for Star Wars. You know, as a director, he was great on.
All the stories point to he didn't really enjoy the actual making of process.
No. He was great on American Graffiti, and he was great on those kind of things. But for some reason, but anyway, besides all that, I think it's a lot of it was the time as well. It was at that particular time. There was something magical about that time where everything seemed to go well, and everything. Everybody had an optimistic view on the productions. And although we knew where the problem areas would be, you could read them straight away off. When you read the script, you can tell where the problem areas are just by reading the script. And so it was at a time when everybody was optimistic about stuff. Money was everywhere. You know, if you wanted something, it was there. There was no questions asked.
Well, I guess the film industry has changed quite a bit now, but what we do have is an amazing advancement in technology that has somewhat democratized the filmmaking process. Perhaps not everyone now needs a huge studio to back them to get their own project done. What are your thoughts in terms of how things have changed and how creative people should perhaps nowadays be inspired to create their own work?
I think we all should be grateful because we're living in an era. There's lots of stuff that are not good that's going on, obviously, but we are living in an era where we can do what we feel is right. You know, we think we're free to a certain extent, and we can do what we feel is right and be creative. And we're allowed to do this, for God's sake, you know, because part of the of cultures and systems is that at some point we all have to be controlled, don't we? Otherwise, it'd be a nightmare if everybody was an individual. Imagine if everybody was an artist. Nothing. We wouldn't last that long. But you know, when we have this ability to do this, we should use it as much as we can, because you know nobody knows what's around the corner. And not the fact that you should use every second that you have spare, but instead of just sitting watching telly, you know, it's great to do stuff because that can lead to other things. This business, I always tell people, you know, that feel as if they need inspiration. Forget the inspiration. Just get the plaster off the shelf and mix it with water, and that gives you the inspiration. That as soon as you start using your hands and getting dirty, things happen.
And be open to mistakes, you know, because they can lead to weird and wonderful directions. Happy accidents can result in fantastic outcomes.
Yeah. And you can't think of accidents. You can think in terms of what might go wrong, but you can't. You know, the chaos principle. You're not clever enough to kind of go with it. You know what I mean? You've got to actually physically do it for it to happen. And instead of waiting for the inspiration, you know, I tell a lot of people that, you know, because they think that artists, or when I'm doing some painting, you know, how do you paint? I said, I splurge it out the tube and I start then. And by doing that, it happens, you know, because you're forcing yourself into something, and it just happens that, you know, you look at your watch and it's 7 o'clock in the morning, you look at it again, it's 7 o'clock at night, for God's sake, you know, and it's that good.
Well, on that note, we have to leave things there. Thank you so much, Dennis, for the chat and your amazing stories to do with Alien. I look forward to talking to you soon.
Nice meeting you. Bye-bye then. Bye.
Now, thank you so much to Dennis once again for his time and exceptional kindness in allowing us to use multiple videos and stills throughout that interview. Please check out his website link here, which is also included in the description text of this video. And check out his amazing Alien Maker series of videos, as well as some of his other creative work he has on there. If you like this video, be sure to like and subscribe, and maybe even consider joining our Patreon family, if this is the type of content you like to see. Until next time, this is JP, signing off.